Family relationship is somewhat particular in Korea. While closer family bond is considered as a general trait of East Asian culture, the long Confucian tradition from the last dynasty gives an extra dynamic to Korean families. In the Confucian world, your value as a person doesn't just lie in your individual quality and talent, but in your relationship to the others. As a loyal subject to the king, hard-working worker to your boss, a disciplined student to your teacher. And at the very basis of these social relationships is your family. This fundamental social attitude lends certain sense of duty to the family dynamic beyond your personal love and bond to them. You're the vessel carrying the family clan to the next generation. You should be a stern but loving parent to your child, and respectful and obedient child to your parents. And beyond them, you should also pay sufficient respect to your ancestors because they represent your root and origin. This emphasis manifests in elaborate funeral rituals and subsequent memorial services to the late ancestors. In a bit more superstitious note, your role as a family member doesn't seem to end with death either. There are a lot of stories and references that one of your late ancestors, usually a grandparent, but sometimes even a great or great-great-grandparent, playing the role of a guardian angel to their descendants. That could be, of course, out of personal love and care for the descendant, but again, there's also a certain sense of fulfilling the responsibility for the lineage and prosperity of your family clan. It's not uncommon people talking about thanks to the ancestors or for the blessings from the ancestors when something good happens. So, here are 5 allegedly true stories about the dead ancestors reaching over to save the life of their descendants. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by your host, Anthony. It's what happened when I was a newborn baby. Sons are rare in my family. Both my great-grandfather, grandfather, and my father were the only sons in their respective generation. And so when I was born, I was literally babied by every family member, though the prestige waned quickly when my younger brother followed. One late night, my parents were kicked out of their sleep by a phone call. My mother answered it, and it was my grandfather on the line. He abruptly asked if the baby, me, was okay. Mother replied all was well and the baby was asleep, but grandfather insisted that she should go and check it again herself. When she did, she found me suffocating under the blanket. They used the starched, stiff blanket to wrap me up, and its corner had unfolded itself and covered my face. Mother quickly removed it and reported back what happened to grandfather. Then explained how he came to call her in time. In his dream, his late father, my great-grandfather, had appeared. Grandfather was happy to see him again, but great-grandfather started to scold him, shouting, "You are sleeping sound now when your grandson is dying," and beat him with his walking stick. Grandfather woke up alarmed and called my parents just to make sure. My mother would still tell me when we prepare the memorial ritual for my great-grandfather that I should pay special attention, for he had saved my life. When I was little, I was very sickly and used to spend at least 1/3 of a year in the hospital. Family members and relatives occasionally paid a visit to my hospital bed, which was always a welcome news to my boring hospital life, except when my grandma visited. I was scared of my grandma. In her late 70s, she was still tough as anything and swore like a seaman. Her fearful reputation had only grew after grandfather passed. She'd always say, looking at me lying on the hospital bed, "What's the use of a man so sickly? Take those balls off, you don't deserve it." Or, "How much longer are you going to lying around, eh? You're just wasting all those pills and drips and whatnot." Or, "Your dad wasn't so weak. Who'd seed you have it taken to turn out a wimp?" Her every sentence was enough to make me teary, and all the other family members had to sweat to diffuse the situation. I sometimes even hid away somewhere when Grandma came until she had to leave for her bus schedule. My parents would scold me for that, but I couldn't help it for the fear of my grandma. My condition got worse over time, but doctors could not pinpoint what exactly was the issue with me. By the time I turned to 11, I would suffer daily vomit and constantly fall down as if somebody pushed me, and ended up on a pushchair. I lost all my appetite and energy and slept most of the day through. Hospital treatment were doing little for me, and I was discharged. My desperate parents in the end called in a shaman. Grandma's reaction was, "What the fuss is this all about? Bringing the noisy bitch in?" But the shaman was not fazed at all and looked about the house around with her sharp eyes. "This house is haunted with an evil. It stuck to that boy when he was born in this house to possess his soul. It's too late now. The evil is too strong to do anything against," shaman said. It was a shocking revelation. The shaman declared that I had months to live before she turned back and went. My parents collapsed on the spot, while my grandma shouted swears at the back of the shaman. Then, a few days later, my grandma passed away. That tough woman with the spirit of a burly man suddenly died. Everybody could not believe it. Grandma lived by herself since Grandpa died, and that morning my uncle, who lived nearby, paid a good morning visit, only to find her dead in her sleep. After a funeral, I had a dream. I saw Grandma's grave opening up. She walked out of it with an axe in her hand. She marched without hesitation towards my family home. Her face seemed so enraged that it looked like a devil himself. I woke up as scared as ever. A few days later, I had another dream. Grandma, in a shroud, was standing in front of a house with an axe. My house. I thought she must have come from dead to get me. She came over to me and started striking axe at me. I woke up startled. And then, since that dream, I started to regain energy, which was the beginning of the miraculous recovery. I could hardly swallow thin gruel yesterday, and suddenly I asked to have meat and rice today. My parents were elated and said that late Grandma must have done something for me, but I didn't believe a word of it. But when the shaman was brought in again to re-examine the situation, what she explained surprised us all. "Your granny is an amazing person. She saved you in her death. She was the only shaman in town, and my grandma, shortly before she passed, came to visit the shaman and asked to bring her an axe should she die. Shaman could not understand what grandma was on about, but grandma insisted, handing over a bunch of money. So when grandma passed, the shaman indeed brought an axe over to her grave and offered it with a little ceremony. "You're a truly lucky boy. Your granny drove the evil spirit off of you. Live a healthy life now. And here, I return the money your granny gave me," shaman said. Wrinkled bunch of dirty banknotes, which grandma must have saved over the years, mounted to 760,000 won. I still can't believe my grandma, who had never said a single warm word to me, turned out to be my savior. Following story describes a suicide attempt. Viewer discretion is advised. I lost my dad at 19, just 2 days before my high school graduation. His business had gone bankrupt shortly before his passing, and our home, couple of other real estates, and mom's store were all confiscated. I argued with Dad about going to university. I shouted at him what uni education was for when we had lost everything. And he passed 2 days later, while away tending the closing of his business. It was a heart attack. The inheritance and his life insurance amounted to about $300,000, but his debt was more than twice of that, so we had to give up the inheritance to be exempt of the debt. So I turned 19 with nothing left in hand. I started university but dropped out before the end of the first semester. Seeing the situation of my family getting worse rapidly day by day, my childish impatience and anxiety grew to the tipping point. And one day in October, I swallowed all the sleeping pills I could gather with a bottle of soju. I found myself eating at an underground restaurant with Dad. "Let's finish and go," he said. I wasn't sure what of, but I felt uncomfortable. After having dragged on eating as slowly as possible, I then excused myself to the toilet. I sat there and lit on a cigarette. "What's taking you so long, son?" Dad asked. For some reason, I didn't feel like replying. I ignored him calling me several more times. Suddenly, Dad burst open my cubicle door. "If you don't even have guts to come with me, why were you even trying, foolish boy?" He slapped me hard on the face. And I woke up in the middle of gastric lavage procedure. I still saw Dad in my dreams occasionally. He would sit on my bedside a long time without saying a word. It's from a long time ago, when I was 6. That year, my grandpa passed away. I was too young and didn't even get to see much of the funeral and burial procedure. Now, the empty room of Grandpa became my room. We lived in the traditional house, and the room had one door linking to the kitchen and the other leading out to the courtyard. The kitchen had no windows and became a hall of pitch black at night with no lights on. I was scared of the darkness, well, but that was my room now. My first night alone there. A faint voice calling me woke me up from my sleep. It was from the kitchen, and the voice was of my mom's. I thought Mom had some nibble or something for me, and got up. I could see the dim silhouette of her. She was just standing there waving her hand beckoning me, which I felt a bit odd. "Mom?" She didn't answer, but kept waving her hand stuck in the spot. But it's Mom, so I shook off the odd feeling and was about to get up. "Don't get up. It's not your mom." A low male voice told me from my back. I looked around to find nobody there. I panicked and bursted out through the door to the courtyard. On the way to my parents' room, I stumbled over a water basin and drenched myself with the cold water too. In the room, my mom was there, sleeping next to Dad. I hopped in between them like a frightened kitten and told them there was somebody in the kitchen. Mom got up and checked the kitchen out. It was empty, except for a puddle of water on the floor about where the silhouette of the person was standing. My mom is a very tidy person, and she wouldn't have left a puddle of water at the end of the day. What would have happened if I came up to that thing? I believe it was my grandpa who warned me. His spirit might have lingered around in his room. After all, he adored me so much and always took his time to play with me when he was alive. I was particularly close to my grandpa. My household was unusually big, with grandpa, families of 2 uncles and their children, as well as my parents and me. Probably because I was the youngest of all his grandchildren, Grandpa was especially fond of me. He was my friend and protector. I remember whenever I was upset or scared, whether of a thunderstorm or angry mom, I ran to my grandpa and slept in his arms. Unfortunately, carefree childhood didn't last long. With increasingly declining health, Grandpa was hospitalized. Meanwhile, now a rebellious teenager, I had become a troubled child. I hung out with a gang of posers and started drinking and smoking. I drifted further and further away from family and school. In the cold winter of my 16th year, as usual, I skipped classes and was hanging out with my gang at an internet cafe playing games. My phone went off. It was Dad. Funny, I thought. He hardly ever called me. I casually ignored it and concentrated on my game. Not several minutes later, I got a series of calls from my uncles as well as Dad. Shit, since whenever they started to care about whatever I was doing. Piss you all off. After quite some time, I noticed my phone stopped ringing. I checked it out to find there were 25 missed calls and 2 unread messages. I opened a message from a cousin. Grandpa is in critical condition. He won't last long and is longing to see you now. The message came 50 minutes ago. I jumped up and started running, leaving the grunts of my gang behind. At the hospital, I was met by resentful eyes of our uncles, but that wasn't the matter. I passed them and into Grandpa's room. He was looking peaceful on bed. Dad slapped me hard and bellowed at me. He was looking for you till the very last minute. I could not move or say anything. More than the pain on my cheek, I was now more scared of those resentful eyes of my family around me. A year passed, and another cold winter. I meanwhile cut contact with my gang, though I wasn't really back on the track. Family was still giving me a cold shoulder. One night, I experienced sleep paralysis. It was the first time for me. It didn't last long, but woke me up completely. Sitting up in the middle of the night, I craved for a cigarette, which I had run out. So I went out to 24-hour convenience shop. It was 3 in the morning. I lit one cigarette as soon as I got out of the shop and dragged on it long. That's better. I was about halfway on the crosswalk when my phone rang. It was Dad. Ever since the day Grandpa passed, it became a habit to always answer my phone right away, and so I picked it up and was barely saying hello when a heavy truck whizzed past right in front of me, almost touching my nose. "What is it? Are you all right?" Dad cried on the phone. I explained what just happened, and Dad, after a long silence, told me come back home quickly and carefully. By the time I was back, the light was on in the whole house. I expected to get yelled at by Dad once again, but instead, he hugged me tightly in his arms. I was confused, but since it had been so long that I felt him so close, I just let him be. Then I saw other family members standing around, some with teary eyes, some with a smile. It had been so long to see them looking at me so warm. Dad then explained that night every family member experienced sleep paralysis, and they all saw, except I, Grandpa calling, "My grandson, my grandson," over and over again. As soon as they got off the paralysis, they checked on me, and upon finding my room empty, Dad called me up. Tears ran down my face as I realized what had just happened. Grandpa, who'd been my friend and protector in my childhood, who'd been loving me till the very last moment of his life, and whose love I had failed to return, had nevertheless saved my life. Thank you, and I love you, Grandpa. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. This will be the first of the 2-part series. Today we took a look at stories where a dead ancestor being the guardian angel. And for the next one, we'll have a look at the opposite situations where the dead family member becoming the angel of death. So stay tuned. Family dynamic is such an intimate matter and difficult to explain unless you lived in and experienced the culture for some time. But probably these stories might be able to provide some hint to the inner workings of Korean families. I also suggest, if you haven't yet, to check out my previous episodes about Korean funerals and memorial rituals to further understand the complex relationship to the dead family members in the Korean culture. Links in the description. If you like my work, please subscribe, like, comment, and share my videos on other social medias. It really helps me to carry on with the channel. Until the next, have a wonderful week and take care.